Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can find and subscribe to this podcast via Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our site, vmspod.com, to find more information, as well as our RSS feed, which you can plug into any podcatcher so you never miss an episode of the Virtual Memories Show. You can also follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, and YouTube, where I go by vmspod, and subscribe to my semi-weekly newsletter at buttondown.com/vmspod. Well, I am back from Small Press Expo weekend. I skipped SPX last year due to, we'll say, work stress and some other stuff. And I guess I could have made that same excuse this time around, but I'm glad I went. Spent time with a ton of friends. Got to connect with people maybe in ways I wasn't exactly able to in the past. I wrote about it a little on Sunday, that evening when I got home in the newsletter, but I've been ruminating on this since. And some of that newness, I think, comes from my whole emotional state after Dad's death. And I think some of it, at least for this crowd, is tied to my recent experience of drawing just a 2-page comic. That's all. But figuring out some of the things that my cartoonist pals have spent decades doing. And, you know, in other ways, I also kind of really leaned into what I do as a cultural appreciator / promoter through conversation, through this show. The role that plays, the meaning it has for people, I kind of owned, I guess. And it all just led to really fulfilling talks with people. Although that led to my voice being totally scorched and my staying up until midnight Friday and Saturday, which is way past my bedtime, but it was a good time. And I came away with a couple new episodes, prospects for more, some new friends, lots of comics, you know. I did also have a few instances of people telling me how much they appreciate this podcast. And that, that means a lot to me. But the funny thing was, early on, this younger artist came up to me to tell me how much he liked the show, but I figured he was going to be someone who, only cited the comics specific shows, but he started going into the Philip Roth stuff and the non-comics side of things. And, I found that pretty gratifying because, my whole thing is I always tell people, listen to a show where the description does not interest you, because I guarantee you're going to come out of it thinking, I never knew this about this field, this guy, this whatever. So anyway, I was kind of glad about that. And it did set a good tone throughout the whole of Saturday when I was on the show floor. It was a good weekend all around. That stuff ought to fortify me a while, because I'm heading up to Boston for a biotech conference tomorrow to go give a presentation and moderate a panel. And then that's another multi-hour trip up there, multi-hour trip back. Don't know if I'm taking the train or driving. Drove down to SPX and back, and that's beaten me into the ground. But whatever. This is what I do for love, and the job is what I do for supporting my love. And in better news, I have the next 4 episodes of the show already recorded now, which means I can let off the gas a little and start catching up with some other projects, like my book, the next issue of Haiku for Business Travelers, that 2-page comic that I still have to finish up for Dean Haspiel. But it's good to be a little bit ahead, finally. For now, we got to get to this week's show. My guest this time is M.L. Rio, who has a dynamite novel out now called Hot Wax from Simon & Schuster. Hot Wax is the story of a woman named Suzanne, whose dad was a not quite almost famous rocker in the 80s. And the book follows 2 timelines, pre-COVID present, like 2018, after her dad's death. And then it also goes through Suzanne's childhood, centering on the weeks in 1989 that she spends on tour with her dad and his band, Gill and the Kills. You can imagine why I was so interested in reading this book. So in the present, Suzanne inherits her dad's souped-up ranchero, despite not having heard from her dad or not having communicated with him for a very, very long time. And she finds herself just compelled to bail on her husband and embark on a road trip without destination in mind. And she falls in with a bohemian couple while her straight-laced husband searches for her. But in the past, in that 1989 timeline, 10-year-old Suzanne is part of the band, beginning the road trip that's going to come to define her life. And we get a front row seat to the Gill and the Kills shows, and we really get this electric connection that ML conveys between Suzanne's dad and the guitarist Skelly, known as the Hands. That's going to come up later in the episode. But Suzanne's story, like the inevitable trauma of her childhood experience as the Kills get to the cusp of success, and the ways that the present-day version of her is still picking up the pieces, that powers the book, just propels you forward, just seeing how these times interact, how this person approaching 40 is looking back at this 10, 11-year-old self and what rock and roll means. And what it means, well, what it means when you're a kid and what it means when you're older. I don't know. It's a book that's just about the redemptive and destructive power of rock and roll, and that touches every page of the book. ML's narrative powers here are they're just phenomenal. Like I say, it's a propulsive novel. It's one that will just keep you wrapped as a reader, not to find out what happens next, but because you are so immersed in these characters, the world they're living in, and the tension of story around them. And that goes for whether it's a child's eye view of like low rent rock gigs, or this jaded 40-year-old's rediscovery of herself, or the point of view of the jilted husband who just wants to know what the heck happened to his wife and the happy home life he thought he was building. There's a very funny joke about what music means to him as opposed to what it means to Suzanne and the other people in their lives. I'm not going to ruin it for you, because when you hit that moment in the book, you will laugh out loud and get everything about this character totally summed up in who his favorite music act is. Anyway, M.L. Rio has made a fantastic novel about rock and roll and what comes after. I enjoyed the living hell out of it, as ought to be clear from the conversation you're about to hear. But, you know, I'll add, and I talk about it early on, her ability to capture the experience of a live performance just blew me away. And I think it's part of what separates this book from other ones about music. Although we also talk about John Ray's Gone to the Wolves that we recorded about 2 years ago. That one also gets at this. They're both really gifted writers when it comes to what it means to be in the audience. So go get Hot Wax, out now by M.L. Rio from Simon & Schuster. And if you get a chance, catch M.L. on tour. She's in a 34-city tour that started last week when we recorded this one. The clips I've seen of her events, it looks like a blast. Now, as caveats and corrections go, I cited the wrong Elvis Costello album. When you get to that moment, you'll understand what I'm talking about. I, in fact, meant Imperial Bedroom, not Armed Forces, and Imperial Bedroom does describe my personality as a micromanaging control freak. Armed Forces was a favorite of my friend Hayden, and that was because he was a situationist and blah, blah, blah. This will all make sense when you get to it. But my brain was pretty fried, and I just blurted out Armed Forces because I had heard accidents will happen on the drive into New York that day. Oh, and the artist whose name I'm trying to remember at the end is Ed Ruscha. Also, ML's bracelets jingle a little in the background. That's the sort of lower noise you're going to hear throughout the whole thing. Now, here's ML's bio. M.L. Rio has been an actor, a bookseller, an academic, and a music writer. She holds an M.A. in Shakespeare Studies and a Ph.D. in English Literature. She is the author of the internationally best-selling novel If We Were Villains, the USA Today best-selling novella Graveyard Shift, and now Hot Wax. She never stays in one place for long, but keeps her books, records, and four-legged sidekick in South Philadelphia. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with M.L. Rio. Where did Hot Wax begin for you, and how did it change from what you thought you were writing?
Oh, man. Well, so I've been working on this book in one way or another for like almost 10 years. I wrote the first version of this novel way back in 2016, actually, before my first novel had even come out. So I always intended this to be my second novel and was sort of expecting it to follow closely on the heels of the first, which was not how it worked out. But I had been a just voracious listener of all kinds of music from a very young age. My dad was a concert bouncer in Los Angeles in the 70s, so he got to be very kind of up close and personal with some really major rock acts in their heyday in kind of the best place in the world for that. And so I got an ear for dad rock, for lack of a better word, from the time I was like, 9 or 10. Yeah. And I, as a young person, desperately wanted to be a guitar player, like more than anything in the world. That was just something that I could not imagine anything cooler or more exciting. But I was also a pretty rough and tumble kid, and I couldn't stop breaking my fingers long enough to like actually get good at it. So I just sort of became a fanatic instead. And music was always inseparable from my writing process. It's the point zero for all my projects, not just Hot Wax. Like the first thing I do when I'm writing a new book is make a playlist of just stuff that feels like it could be the soundtrack to the book, the right vibe, a song that makes me think of a character, things like that. And I also spent a lot of my youth on road trips. We traveled all the time. We lived in a bunch of different places. And my favorite place to be was in the backseat of the car with my headphones on. That was like my safe space. That was where I got to just kind of be in my own imaginative world, uninterrupted for hours and hours.
See, unfortunately for me, that was The Who when I was 9. Walkmans were just like invented, and it was cassettes of The Who just blasting my goddamn ears out before I turned 10 years old, which warped my body and mind ultimately in a lot of messed up ways. But,
my dad gave me a David Bowie CD when I was like 9, and nothing after that was ever the same.
At least with me as an older brother. So, yeah, you had no excuse. That's just, Well,
I did have an older brother, but I think part of my dad's determination to get me a good musical education is actually that about the same age that I was kind of falling in love with all of his music from when he was a teenager. My brother was developing really bad taste in music, and my dad was like, maybe it's not too late for this one. But... yeah.
Road trips. Yeah,
road trips. Like, a lot of time in the back of the car on road trips. So, like, music, cars... going west, those things were always kind of inseparable for me. And even as I got older and I was sort of settled, the longest I've ever lived in one place was I lived in DC for some years while I was doing my PhD. Before that, I had never lived in a place for longer than 6 months.
I live in the house where I grew up.
Really?
Yeah, everybody has that reaction.
Wow.
Most of my 54 years have been spent in the same house.
That's crazy.
I travel the world, and I come back to this one stable point in the woods.
Though.
I know. It's great.
Yeah.
Everybody else has that. Boy, that would be interesting. Glad Gil's doing it and not me. That's.
Well, I'm sort of the opposite of that. My friends are like, you haven't had a permanent address in like 5 years. Like, how do you manage that? But I always loved being on the go. And so the idea for Hot Wax was I just really wanted to write a road trip book that was also a concert tour book, because those two things just seemed to go together, especially for the kind of music that I was really into, very anachronistically, like years after it was really popular. So that was where it started, and the first version of the book was very different from the version that finally came out, and a lot of things changed in the process, not least of which was I grew up, because the first version of this book that I wrote, I was still, like 25 and didn't have a book out in the world, and 10 years is a long time. 10 years is a long time in your life and also just in the world itself. So the book sort of had to grow up with me and kind of adapt to my worldview changing and just the landscape around me shifting, socially, politically, environmentally, all of it. So it's been through a lot of changes, but it feels like it's found its final form and like the right form. And in some ways, I'm actually really grateful it took this long, because I don't think I was ready to write it when I first tried to write it. I think I had to sort of wait until I was an older and more seasoned writer to tackle this particular project. But yeah, it was a way for me to kind of do all of the things I love at the same time. It's a book about music. It's a book about travel. It's also a book about food, and like weird diners and road food, because that's kind of like my bread and butter. I am not an epicure by any means. And also it's a book about stuff, it's a book about kitsch, it's a book about clothes, it's a book about costumes, and particularly stuff from last century, because that's kind of where my heart is. So yeah, it's been a real fun world building process as much as anything else.
There are books you're going to come across, not to be the old man telling you this stuff, but there are books you're going to come across later in your life that, oh, thank God I didn't try to read this when I was 20, 30.
Oh, that's happened to me already.
Yeah, you'll see there'll be more and more of them as we get older. It's really horrible, but not to warn you off of how terrible age is going to be. But there's a great deal that you
I've enjoyed getting older, actually, and that may seem like kind of a rich thing to say at the ripe old age of 33, but
it's a big jump from the 20s. The 20s are always your golden age, and then you discover that things get richer.
Yeah, and that actually, this book is a little bit about that too, because one thing I noticed in the fiction landscape is we have a lot of books that are geared towards teenagers and 20-somethings, especially like when I was growing up. I was a little too old for this, but the YA boom happened kind of right after I was that age, and I was already like off reading the Victorians because I was a weird, morbid kid who really liked...
A lot of people your age were still reading younger.
Yeah, because YA kind of like didn't exist, and then it happened, and it was huge. Yeah. And we sort of had new adult tried to happen for a while, but never really took off. And then there's this kind of like vacuum where we have all these books about 20-somethings kind of, falling in love and figuring out their happily ever after. And then you jump into these novels that are all about like unhappy middle-aged people getting divorced. And there's like nothing in the middle. Your 30s are this weird lost decade, especially for women, I think, where it's like, what are you supposed to be doing with yourself? Are you supposed to be girl bossing and kind of chasing your career? Are you supposed to be settling down and starting a family? Like, nobody knows. Nobody knows. And I just looked around me and noticed that all of my friends in my 30s, but particularly the women, were kind of losing it, and for reasons that felt very justified. And so this became what one reviewer called a second coming-of-age story, where it's about the main character is 10 in one timeline and in her early 40s in the other timeline. And it's very much about how she goes from being that child to being that adult. Again, those people are very far apart. And it's kind of like, what the hell happened in between to make you like this when you started out this way? So rewriting the book over and over again over the course of 10 years was also me kind of exploring, like... At one point she says in the book, she's not sure if growing up was something you did or something that just happened to you. Yeah. And I think that is kind of the question that really motivated me to rewrite the book the way I rewrote it over the years.
There's a third bridge to it all. Each major section starts with the years in between, the Photoshop. The snapshot sections. When did the structure of the whole shebang actually make sense to you? How did that emerge?
Oh, man. That was probably what we did the most work on in editorial, because the timeline is really complicated. There's an A-side timeline which takes place in 1989 when Suzanne is 10. Mostly when she's 10, she turns 11 in the middle of the book. And then the B-side timeline where she's in her early 40s. And then there are these snapshots in between. So you get a glimpse of her at 16. You get a glimpse of her at 22. You get a glimpse of her in her mid-30s. And that structure actually came out of when I sent the when I sent the submission draft of this book to my editor, Tim O'Connell. It actually had 3 timelines. It was the 1989 timeline, the 2018 timeline, and then there was all of the scattershot stuff in between. And Tim very wisely was like, we need to simplify this, and the way we're going to do it is we're going to do an A-side and a B-side. And we actually tried to cut all of the interstitial stuff out, and that didn't quite work because it felt like there were some gaps in the narrative. So then we decided, let's do a snapshot at the beginning of each part of the novel. And so we landed on that structure. And from there, it was a process of putting all the scenes in the right order. And we moved them around a lot because it was all about making sure what was happening in the A-side timeline is resonating with the next thing you read in the B-side timeline. And I wanted it to feel like those 2 timelines were kind of destined for a collision at some point. Like they're moving closer and closer to each other.
But collision is better than convergence as far as this book goes. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted them to kind of feel like they're sort of hurtling towards each other. And then they meet in this kind of catastrophic way at the very end of the book. Mm-hmm. So,
but it did take somebody from the outside to be able to say, this is all good, but we need to refine, restructure.
Yeah.
And then it comes together.
Yeah. I really loved working with the editorial team on this book. Working with Tim's been a dream. He made this book much better than it would have been otherwise. And part of it was honestly him just giving me permission to swing for the fences and kind of go big or go home. In recent years, there's been a real trend in fiction, and particularly literary fiction, where there's an expectation that it's very quiet, very subdued, and very plotless. And I've never been interested in plotless books. I get bored with books that don't have a narrative arc, that don't have some kind of forward momentum. And maybe that's lowbrow of me, and I think I'm fine with that. But I was holding myself back because I'd had trouble selling books for a long time because my first book actually didn't do super well when it came out. And nobody wanted to buy anything I had to write after that. So I was kind of trying to compress the novel and make it smaller to fit in this little box of like what I thought would be acceptable for literary adjacent fiction written by a woman, because there are a lot of aesthetic expectations that go along with that.
Yeah.
And Tim at one point said to me about something that happens in the middle of the novel, he said, I want this to be bigger, I want this to be their Altamont. And I was like, okay.
Oh, yeah.
He basically just let me off the leash to do all the stuff that I had actually done in earlier drafts of the book. Like, earlier drafts of the book were absolutely insane. One of them had alligators. And I got the sense from a lot of editors who turned us down in those early phases that it was just too big and too much to swallow. So I was kind of trying to make it tame in a way that made no sense for a book about rock and roll, because you can't do that.
Right.
And Tim very wisely just kind of like nudged me and gave me permission to go big and go wild with it. And that was where it really kind of found itself.
The challenges of writing about music performance.
Yeah.
I've read a few rock novels. I've read John Ray's Gone with the...
Isn't it great?
We recorded whenever that came out, a year or two ago. 2 years, maybe?
Yeah, it's magnificent. I love that novel.
Love that one. The standard joke I have about all this stuff, and I may have been too young when I read it at the time, was Rushdie doing The Ground Beneath Her Feet, where he seemed to posit an alternate universe where, like, Meatloaf was the biggest thing in the world in a prog rock kind of operatic way. That's really not what rock and roll does.
No.
So yeah, the challenges of conveying what it's like being in the audience, what it's like seeing rock and roll performed. You know, how was that for you?
It was so much fun. And it is, you know, I think the reason we don't have more and better rock novels is because it's hard to do.
Yeah.
It's really hard
You pull it off. I enjoyed the living hell out of those scenes in particular. I was like, she gets what that vibe is. So anyway, go on.
Yeah, well, that was something that, one of the ways that I research is when I'm writing a new book, I read as many books as I can get my hands on that have similar themes, similar concepts, similar whatever. So I read dozens and dozens of road trip novels, and I also just read every novel I could get my hands on about music. And one thing I noticed is that a lot of them kind of avoid actually putting it on stage and writing about live performance. And I went, okay, that's what's going to set this book apart, is that's exactly what I want to do, is write about the performance. And that comes partly from just being a fan. I have spent so much of my life in the audience at rock shows, and it's still my favorite place to be. And much like my first novel, Villains, like that was something I hadn't seen represented in a way that I recognized in a deep way in a lot of fiction. And John's book is a great example of an exception to that. Like reading Gone with the Wolves, you're like, oh, this is someone who gets this and has been on the scene and is really bringing it to life. With the detail about like what everyone is wearing and like who's going to be who is signaling that they're one of the cool kids, who's going to get beat up for wearing the wrong shirt, like that kind of thing. But I'm also a performance studies scholar by training. I have a PhD in English lit, but my focus is on Shakespeare and performance practice.
That's just figuring it's all theater in a sense.
Oh,
so,
absolutely. People always find it kind of odd. They're like, so the girl with the Shakespeare PhD is doing the rock and roll book. Like they have trouble making that make sense in their heads.
Well, my friend Kathy Kocher will contend that Kit Marlowe was the rock star.
Oh,
the
he
proto-rock
absolutely
star
was.
Of the era and
he
beyond.
Absolutely was.
Yeah.
And it's never been far apart for me. Like I fell in love with those things at roughly the same time because it's this very high drama and sometimes it's, quite lowbrow and it's exciting. It's really exciting, and it's exciting to be a part of, and especially when you have bodies in a room. What's so unique about live performance that you don't get with like screen media or really any other form of entertainment is bodies in a space interacting with one another, and it's all about how is the audience responding to what the performer is doing? Is the performer reading that? Is the performer feeding off that energy from the audience? How does a show change based on who's in the room, the size of the crowd, who showed up for this gig? And that's something that I just really enjoy from kind of an intellectual perspective, evaluating what is a good performance? Is it working? Is it working? Is it having the effect on the audience that it's supposed to have? So that was something I really wanted to kind of put front and center with Hot Wax. And it's something that I've always done in my writing as a music journalist is I write as much about the crowd at a given show as I do about what's happening on stage, because I'm just deeply curious about like, who comes out to see Brian Wilson in Baltimore on a Tuesday night in 2022? Like, who is at that show? I'm so curious who's at that show. And
men 20 years older than me, I'm guessing, but go, which is fine. You know, that's.
Yeah, no, I've spent a lot of time being the youngest person in the room at a lot of the gigs that I cover and like interviews I do. But, you know, like one of the most fun shows I ever covered for the magazine was Suede did a tour with the Manic Street Preachers when they hadn't played here in something like 25 years. I don't think they toured here. I think they played like one festival in that time. And there were people at this show who legitimately had been waiting like 25 years to see Suede. There was one guy who, for some unknown reason, was wearing a cowboy hat the whole night. This was at Fillmore East in Silver Spring, Maryland, so cowboy hats were not like something you saw every day. Loudly telling anyone who would listen that it was like the best night of his life. And I love that vibe of a bunch of strangers who are like together to enjoy the same thing, and they will never see each other again, but for like 2 hours it's your best friends in the world.
It's communion.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll share, because, you know, mine is incredibly embarrassing. I don't know what yours is going to be. First show?
Oh, God, that's so hard to remember.
Oh, mine's very easy to remember, and I will laugh at myself over it
again and again. Do you want to go first and I'll think?
Asia. 1983, my mom was friends with a finance manager who ended up getting arrested for essentially Ponzi scheming his clients. But yeah, he got us almost front row seats and then backstage passes to see Asia when I was 12, and that was my first show.
All right.
You know, when I mentioned the prog rock thing, I'm not, you know, speaking too derisively, because that stuff did inform a good chunk of my youth and upbringing.
Sure.
So, you know, but yeah, Yes was at Brendan Byrne, which was the next to Giant Stadium in the Meadowlands. It's all gone now. It's turned into a mall, which is the way of all New Jersey.
Yeah.
But first show?
Well, the first one that I remember going to that wasn't like something my parents took me to
not
was
an escapades thing, you know.
My brother and I remember this distinctly because we really had to lobby our parents to let us go to this. My brother and I went to go see Green Day when I was probably like 11 and he was maybe like 13. And I remember it vividly because our parents just kind of dropped us off at this big giant arena where they were playing, and we had no idea where we were supposed to be going. We didn't have phones, and we somehow ended up like in the VIP parking lot, just this like random couple of kids like wandering around the tour bus. Yeah. So I do remember that pretty distinctly as being like the first show I have conscious memories of. Yeah.
That Juliana Hatfield line about the first all ages show and all this. But
well, if he wants me to be really jealous of the first concert that my dad ever went to, I wasn't even alive, and I'll be jealous about this till I die. My dad's first concert was he went to go see Zeppelin at the Forum in '72. He was 14. Right?
Which is another question I had, which is a split question. Who do you wish you could have seen? A, who no longer exists. B, who's still out there, but you haven't. I have never gotten to see Tom Waits, which is a real white whale for me because I adore Tom Waits. Someday, hopefully, I'll get to see him before he goes. Yeah. He's got years left. I'm hoping that pans out for me. You know, Zeppelin was, other than David Bowie, the first artist that I like really fell in love with in like an absolutely obsessive way when I was about the same age my dad was when he went to that concert. And I've seen John Paul Jones on stage. I've seen Robert Plant on stage a number of times, and I've actually I got to be pals with the Led Zeppelin cover band. They're good fun. But yeah, that I mean, they were sort of the ultimate hard rock band. Yeah. So yeah, that would be definitely like I would time travel for that for sure. So growing up, we always had the split among the Beatles, Stones, Who, and Led Zeppelin as the, we'll say, 4 points of a compass. I don't know if they're all pointing to hell, but whatever. There was, it was 4 points nonetheless.
I think the Beatles are too cute to go to hell.
Yeah. I mean, they had, when things got psychedelic, things got weird, but, it was still just a
True.
Sort of defined who you were. The same way my three friends and I had back in grad school, your favorite Elvis Costello album and what it said about who you were.
Oh, sure.
And we were all pretty clear once we just happened to mention what our favorites were. They were all different, and they all said something very, very distinct about our personalities, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that would be My Aim Is True, like right out the gate.
The first one. Yeah, My Aim Is True was our friend who was an indie rock journalist because he always wanted... If he could have found an album before that, that would have been his fave.
Everything after the first EP sucks, as they say on the scene.
I unfortunately was armed forces because I'm a micromanaging control freak, and that's just how things go. But that's me and my persona. You mentioned falling into the Victorians rather than the whole YA thing. What was your literary? You mentioned the musical upbringing, and you mentioned in the note in the review copy that a whole bunch of CDs got dropped on you by your old man and got you started. What was your literary upbringing like? Oh, man.
It was chaotic and largely unsupervised. Yeah. I was a very early reader and a very fast reader, and I think my parents just kind of gave up on policing what I was reading, which sometimes had ill effects, like, me picking up American Psycho when I was way too young to be reading that. But I did also have like a semi-religious experience encountering Shakespeare for the first time when I was about the same age. Yeah. And one summer I made it my project when I think I was about 12 to read the whole complete works, so I did. It just, that kind of opened up the whole world of classic and adult literature to me. I was like, I don't need to keep reading kids' books because I can read these other books, and this is like so much more interesting. And I had a whole phase in high school where I was very into the Victorian Gothic, and I think that has everything to do with 10 malformative years in Catholic school, where all that Gothic stuff is just kind of in the air all the time. I loved Dracula. I loved stuff like that. And I was actually really quite precious about my vampire fiction because I was like, no, don't give me any of this Anne Rice garbage. Like,
I'm a purist.
Yes, we have to go back to Carmilla. We have to go back to the source. But that also, I think, had something to do with my long-term obsession with rock and roll, is there is this kind of like flirtation with the devil in all of it. It's Robert Johnson met the devil at the crossroads. And I think growing up with the extremely gothic fire and brimstone trappings of Catholicism, which I have since very much walked away from.
Does it still permeate?
Oh, I mean,
do you find your life as a sort of reaction or rebellion against?
Oh, I'm sure in some ways. I mean, there's definitely moments of pretty stark blasphemy that come up in the book because the main character, Gil, and I do have that lapsed Catholic thing in common. But, that's why we have the phrase lapsed Catholic, is you're a Catholic forever, even if you're lapsed. Like, that stuff does not leave you. And that's by design, that stuff doesn't leave you. I think it really just made me very interested in these questions of sin and temptation and moralism as a kind of ideological force, especially when it comes to something like culture and cultural expression. I'm thinking of Oscar Wilde saying, there's no such thing as an immoral book. A book is well written or poorly written, and that's all. And that's actually something I've noticed in the past, really even just like 10 years that I've been in publishing, is there is a sort of loss of nuance in a lot of literature and the way people react to it. Like, I've had to explain to young readers before that depiction does not equal endorsement. Just because I'm representing something on the page doesn't mean that I'm...
Oh, there's a great editorial by Jen Silverman, one of my past guests. She's been on several times. Basically, a New York Times piece with the books are not here for moral instruction.
Yeah.
They're here to open you, but not.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was so weird to me to have to explain to particularly young readers who, to be fair, are just kind of like learning to read. Yeah. Not learning to read, but learning how to read deeply. Yeah. That often you represent something in order to critique it. Like, the point is that it's bad. That's why it's there. And if it makes you feel icky, maybe that's deliberate. And this is something that I've done as a teacher as well, because I taught in a university environment for a long time. I also taught in prison. So I've had so many interesting conversations with people about literature. But yeah, I don't know. I think the Catholic upbringing, it did give me a certain kind of literacy that I might not have had access to otherwise, because we read a lot of the King James Bible, which is not easy to read from a young age. It does have a very kind of poetic...
So it prepared you for Shakespeare in some ways.
It did, and those two things are very of a piece, because the King James Bible was written and put together at the same time that Shakespeare was writing. He was of the King's Men, so there is definitely a kind of lyrical kinship between those things. And I guess I was just... It gave me an interest in the power of language, because Catholicism is very ritualistic. There's lots of chanting, there's lots of praying, there's lots of Latin. Language has enormous significance in the way that it's used. And that was interesting to me as a writer, the idea that you were not allowed to use certain words, and that certain words have power, and that other words, have an almost kind of magical action to them. Like the idea that you can utter the words "I do" and alter your kind of, your entire position in life. So as much as I've had some difficulties moving away from the Catholic Church and all of the not so great things that I brought with me out of that, I do think it gave me a long-term interest in the Gothic and elements of horror and definitely elements of like body trauma. There's a lot of, I've been recently reckoning with how much violence happens in my work and what that's about.
You didn't think about that before? I mean, there's a whole bunch in here, but I'm just kidding.
Well, with this book in particular, because it gets so violent in so many different ways and quite graphically so, I had to sort of sit uncomfortably with that for a minute and be like, why? Why this fixation on violence? But that, too, actually comes back to my interest in bodies and my interest in performance is what is it that we find appealing about violence? Because we do find violence appealing as entertainment. And what is there about that? Like, what's going on with that? But I'm really just interested in the body as a semiotic object. Like, you put a body on stage and you put it in different positions and different proximity to other bodies on stage or bodies in the audience. And, violence is kind of the most intimate contact you can have with someone in some ways. It's like a very negative kind of intimacy, but that was something that I was interested in putting on the page as well, especially because a book is such a disembodied thing that mostly happens in your head. Yeah. I've always been a really visceral writer. I want whoever's reading my books to...
Your big scenes worked viscerally for me. They were very...
Oh, thank you.
Leaning into the page almost, which,
I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, so you pulled that off. I joke that I'm glad we're doing this in person because I do them... I had to start doing these remotely with COVID, and we're doing it by browser. It's audio only, and yet if somebody's levels are low on their end, I find myself leaning in towards the monitor, even though I'm wearing a pair of headphones. It really doesn't matter. But so reading each other as human beings is also part of the in-person thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not that there's any violence engaged in this whole, thing, except for my weird little asides and such. But it did raise the question. You mentioned breaking your fingers a whole bunch of times as a kid, and broken hands and misaligned punches do occur.
Yeah, the hands are really a thing, really a theme in this book.
Yeah. Does that hold up throughout your other work, or is it pretty much centered for Hot Wax?
That was something that really, really came to the fore in Hot Wax in a way that was quasi-accidental. It was, I noticed early on in the big rewrite of this that I started in 2023 that there were a couple of things happening with hands. And as a writer, when you notice patterns in your own work, you have two options. One is to eradicate the pattern and go, that's not supposed to be there. That's repetition, and the audience will find that annoying. Audience, you can tell that I'm a...
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the reader when I say the audience. See, you can take the girl out of the theater. But the other option is to interrogate why that pattern is there and punch it up if it makes sense for the work at hand, if it's a theme that actually kind of needs to be brought to the surface. And that was what happened with the hands in Hot Wax, but pun intended. For those of you who read the book, that might make sense. That was something I was interested in. I have had a lot of injuries to my hands and also my teeth, which is another thing that you might notice in the book. I've had a lot of dental trauma in my life. You write what you know.
Your teeth look great, though.
Oh, thank you.
At least you're willing to smile. I'm not. So.
Well, I actually broke one of my teeth in half on my last book tour and had to get emergency dental work done while I was in California.
Jeez.
Not the first time that's happened. I actually broke the same tooth and had to get it replaced while I was in Romania, of all places.
You might get good cheap dentistry there, though. So.
Yeah, and you know what? That crazy cement tooth that he put in my mouth, it lasted for a good 10 years, and when it finally cracked off, the lady was like, you know what? This lasted longer than it would have had you done
Nobody
here.
thought this would work. So, I'll say my great one was breaking a tooth on a blueberry muffin at the end of 24-hour flight back from New Zealand to Newark. After 2 weeks of climbing glaciers, bungee jumping, jet boating through river canyons, and drinking with Australian men, a blueberry muffin handed me my ass on the flight back. I was like, God damn it, I just might crunch. I'm like, okay, sure. This is what gets me at the end. But,
I'm such a rough and tumble, accident-prone person, and a couple years ago, actually, when I was living out of my car working on this book, I shattered my foot in the middle of one of those road trips. And the doctor was like, how did you even do this? This is like a head-on car crash, falling off a roof injury. You've broken the hardest bone in your body into 225 pieces. And it was literally, I hopped over a box in my parents' kitchen. They have a hardwood floor. I just landed on my heel wrong and was
Crunch.
Nope. But yeah, so the thing with the hands, That was something I decided to lean into that pattern instead of erasing it, because I actually thought it was saying something kind of important about agency. And this is where my early modern kind of training comes in. The hand in early modern culture was really significant as a semiotic object, because the hand was a representation of the will. It was kind of synecdoche for the whole person. So hands will often come up in Renaissance symbolism as representing somebody's will, somebody executing their will. Hand fasting was a practice that was considered basically as binding as a marriage for a long time. And, hands were maybe the only part of your betrothed's body that you might actually touch their skin before your wedding and that kind of thing. So gloves also have a special significance. People sending each other gloves becomes a very romantic thing in the early modern period. At the same time, seizing people's hands and wrists has a lot of interesting overtones in early modern literature, particularly as a kind of shorthand, pun intended, for sexual violence. When you see anyone seizing a woman's hand on stage, that has a deeper significance than is just kind of on the surface there. There's a really interesting moment in Hamlet where Ophelia describes the mad Hamlet bursting into her closet and holding her hand so hard that it hurts. So the question of agency is a big one in this book, of who is in charge and who is pulling the strings and who gets to tell the story. So the many different injuries to hands that happen in the novel have a lot to do with people making choices and often making bad choices, and agency being compromised, autonomy being compromised, and sort of deciding when it's time to kind of reach out and seize something. So yeah, that actually was very deliberate. That was a kind of leitmotif that I really liked for the book, because there is this kind of open question throughout of whose story is this to tell and who has that authority.
Is it okay that I have some sympathy for Suzanne's husband?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I don't think anyone's all black and white. And
yeah, he goes into a spiral, but early on it's I get where he's coming from. Not the path I would have gone with, but and then seeing it deteriorate farther and farther is
Yeah. And that was a delicate balancing act too, because I didn't.
If you make it too villainous, then it's
exactly
it's cardboard and not going to carry any tension.
Yeah, we didn't want Rob to come off as just this kind of cookie cutter bad guy in the book. And that actually, to your earlier question about how did the book change in the writing, Rob was a big part of that, because when I first wrote a version of this book 10 years ago, we lived in a very different world. A road trip across Donald Trump's America is a very different kind of a road trip, because one of the timelines is set in 2018. I was writing it in 2016, and all of this had not happened yet. We could see it coming, but
I usually just say this whole situation.
Yeah. All this gestures at everything.
Yeah.
So that was something I couldn't just ignore in the book. It wasn't something I could just not acknowledge, the way that the world is, as Suzanne puts it, going to hell in a handbasket. And Rob was part of that, because he does start out as a sympathetic character. She has put him in a very bad situation, but his reaction to it is, as you say, this kind of slow unraveling, and at the same time, it is this kind of quiet radicalization that happens in a very unexpected way. And it starts at home, domestically, with his brothers and the way they talk about things, and spirals into this thing that you kind of can't put back in the bottle. So that was something that I was thinking about very carefully in the representation of Rob and his kind of journey through this book. But I actually had quite a lot of fun writing Rob, because he is... Somebody at my event at the Strand last night called him a normie from hell, which I loved that description, because I think you kind of need Rob there to give the reader a sense of how off the wall the rest of these people actually are, because when you're in their world, it starts to get kind of normalized.
It's a road trip. We're having a great time.
It's a road trip. We're having a great time.
Yeah.
Until you have an outside perspective of someone being like, this is insane. You should not have an 11-year-old in this environment. What are you thinking? So I think you do sort of need that normie perspective, and it's not just on that. It's also the scenes of Rob at the swap meets and street fairs where he's trying to make sense of all these people who are
different code.
Yeah, it's a totally different culture, and watching him try to adapt to that was quite fun to write, actually.
It's for all the depth you bring to what it means to be a woman in middle age throughout the book. I was gratified to see how much you brought to a male figure in that. Again, it could have been very easy to just, pastiche or sideline him. But I mean, you really show, as you say, that radicalization, that sense of what it means to be a guy in this position with no one to talk to and getting stuck in a world he doesn't get anymore. And
his reaction to it being what it is, because that's just kind of what he's grown up with, like the blueprint of what is masculine behavior. So as much as it's about what the hell are you supposed to be doing as a woman in your 30s, it's also like, what the hell are you supposed to be doing as a man in your 40s? Like, and are the patterns that we've grown up with the patterns that we really want to keep? And if so, why? Like, what's the reason for that? So, this book does a lot of interrogating of kind of grand assumptions about ways of living.
Yeah. I'll say you show it. You know, the great thing about it is, to me, you're not explicating philosophy. You're showing people's lives, and you do a fantastic job throughout, and showing what performance is like too. But there aren't sudden asides of people explaining for 2 pages. I'm reading Tomas Mann right now, so that's part of my I'll have that in the mornings, and then I'll have some fun, and actually see life as it's lived in your book. So, soundtrack. Do you listen to music while writing?
Yeah, I have music on pretty much all day, every day.
With vocals or without?
Depends.
Okay.
Because
I can't listen to anything with vocals if I'm writing anything.
For me, and this is a quirk of my particular brain, silence is the bad place. Yeah. Silence is a bad place for my brain, and that actually has a lot to do with Catholicism as well. But there's all kinds of little voices in there that I don't like to hear if I can avoid it. So music was really a safe space for me as a kid. That was where I was able to kind of turn down all those really loud voices that were telling me that I was bad and wrong and going to hell just for basically being a normal child. And so music is something that I have on in one way or another pretty much all day. And what I'm listening to really just depends, what else am I doing at the time? If all I'm doing is listening and that's the primary activity, I'll be in the living room with the records and put it on the stereo and do it right. When I'm writing, I have trouble listening to music with lyrics as well, because then I'm not thinking about the words coming out of me. So I am one of Brian Eno's biggest fans.
My meditation music is music for airports.
To so much ambient music. Ambient music. Apollo is my favorite. I do think it's one of the greatest ambient albums ever made, and I think most people wouldn't argue with that. But yeah, I listen to a lot of Brian Eno when I'm writing. Sometimes I'll also listen to classical music when I'm writing. I do also have some long, guitar instrumentals that I'll listen to when I'm writing. I do also just like background noise, so I do like writing in public. I will go sit in, my favorite thing is diners, dive bars, when they're not super crowded, like a baseball game on in the background and some conversation around me. I find that very stimulating as a writer. Possibly because I am what I've referred to as an ethical eavesdropper. I write a lot of dialogue, partly because I don't like to do that info dumpy thing. I think it's so much more interesting to let characters kind of speak for themselves, because the way people talk tells you so much about who they are and who they are to each other. The way characters talk to each other in a scene can tell you a lot about their relationship that I, as the writer, don't then have to butt in and go, and there was trouble in paradise. Much more fun to do with dialogue. So listening to real people talking around me is always delightful and a delightful part of the process. And I did a lot of that with Hot Wax because I spent so much of this writing on the road and doing a lot of writing in roadside diners. I'd drive for 4 hours, find a diner in the middle of nowhere and sit there and type for 2 hours. And a lot of the dialogue that's incidental dialogue is real dialogue that are conversations that I heard people say right next to me. There's a conversation that happens at a dive bar partway through the book that's about strip clubs in town that is verbatim a conversation that happened between 2 guys who were sitting next to me at a bar in Indiana that I will just never forget because it was so funny. And a copy editor was like, "Can we change this to make it grammatically correct?" And I was like, "Don't touch that.
Not a word.
You can't touch that. It's 100% real." But yeah, I think that's a really good tool for a writer to actually kind of be out in the world as you're writing. I think it is tempting to get stuck in our offices where we never have to interact with the environment or other people, but I think that...
Which is why so much fiction has a dog barked in the distance.
Yes.
Because that's what the writer sitting at home hears.
And also why you run into so many books that are about writers.
Yeah.
Which is so boring. Can I be controversial for a minute? I hate that trope more than anything
Listen,
in the
man,
world.
I get asked generally, why do you record with so many older people? Most of my guests are older than me. And I said there was this run of publishers pitching me books by 20-somethings about college, MFA, and working in publishing after they had gone to college, had their MFA, and worked in publishing. I'm like, really not interested. That's not a world I care much about. That person in their 50s and 60s, when they look back at what their 20s were like, yeah maybe interesting. But for the most part, not so much. Writers, not that fascinating a life.
You got to get out of the house and live if you want to be able to write something interesting.
Did you feel safe in we talk about road tripping, sitting in diners and dive bars and writing? You're a gal.
I am, and I travel alone frequently. Last year alone, I think I drove like 15,000 miles by myself for Graveyard Shift Tour, and I get that question a lot. Like whenever I talk to my female friends about going out on these tours and going alone, they're always like, "Are you scared? Do you have a gun?" Was something one of my friends asked me recently. And I'm...
What did you tell him?
I don't have a gun.
Okay, that's important to know. So.
Yeah, I don't have a gun. I'm just like, I've considered whether that would be smart, but I'm just sort of morally opposed to everything guns are doing to this country that I just can't. Yeah. I am, however, getting a flare gun because a flare gun is good for so many things, and that's
and in a pinch,
still threatening. The flare gun to the face is that might scare somebody off. Yeah. But really, it's just that I have traveled a lot and have traveled a lot by myself since I was a teenager, and it's just I'm street smart because I have to be.
Yeah,
I'm street smart. I'm very careful. I check in with people. My publicist, God love her, is like, I'm going to put a geotag in your shoes so I can keep track of you.
Good. Again, it's stuff as a guy I never think about. During lockdown in New York and all that, my male friends would tell me, it's like the Omega Man. I go walking outside. There's nobody out of the streets. The city's empty. After everything, I started talking to women here, and they're like, we didn't leave the house after 2 p.m. because someone's out there. It's your ass. Nobody's come to save you. I'm like, did not think about that. Okay, that's the science fiction, abandoned city thing. Works great if you're a guy, but that's
and it's something I'm definitely thinking about more because again, a road trip across Donald Trump's America is just different. Yeah. And I'm a little more visible than I used to be. Like I do occasionally get recognized by people now. Which is always weird because as a writer, you expect to be very invisible.
People recognize my voice at things, and that freaks me out.
Oh, yeah, that must be strange.
I talked about it in the Ask Me Anything episode, but I once had a call of my day job with the National Department of Defense. And afterwards, one of the guys emailed me with, I'm so sorry. I should have said something during the conference call. They looped me in late. I didn't know who we were talking to, but the moment you started talking, I realized I've been listening to your podcast for years. I'm like... Now, it's one thing if I'm at the Society of Illustrators and some comics people, oh, Gil, I recognize your voice. Somebody from the Department of Defense who's been listening since the Harold Bloom episode, that's a little strange to me. But he felt he had to let me know that he actually knew who I was only from hearing my voice because I didn't tell him who the call was with. It's
like always such a disconcerting thing when your secret persona shows up in a different context. But it's just it is risky, especially as a woman traveling alone. But where I've landed on it is I didn't want to let that stop me from doing the things I wanted to do and being a writer who is out in the world and on the road and traveling to see things and going to national parks with a broken foot, that kind of thing. But that is also something that the book is very much about and interested in is what is it like trying to carve out a place for yourself as a woman in what is still a hyper-masculine environment that is often kind of hostile to your presence. Because it's certainly improving, but, the rock scene is still a very male-dominated space, and I spent a lot of years interviewing musicians who were men, who were quite a bit older than me, and they often didn't realize they were going to be speaking to a woman in her 30s until I walked into the room, because they'd only corresponded with me via email, and I used my initials for my pen name. Not for this reason, but a side effect of it is that often the assumption is that I'm a man until I show up to do an interview, and it's really interesting to sometimes watch the vibe shift immediately. And I always have to be careful about how to play that situation, but that was something I was interested in too with Hot Wax, is most media you see about rock and roll is very male-centric because rock and roll itself has always been very male-centric. Like, there's a reason there's no Almost Famous about a girl, because we know how that would end. and it wouldn't be good. So there is this kind of, growing up as a female rock fan, there is this kind of heartbreak with that, of loving this thing so much and being constantly told that it's not for you and you don't really belong here. So that was tough for me, and I did so much reading about the history of popular music when I was quite young that I had to sort of come to terms with the fact that many people who were kind of my artistic heroes would have seen me as prey at that age. Yeah. So you have two options with that when you're writing a book like this, is you can just kind of ignore it and pretend it's not there in order to not make people uncomfortable, or you can deal with it, which is what I chose to do, because, it's been a part of my life dealing with weird sexism in the music industry and the publishing industry and everywhere in life. And I think, that's one of those things that we depict it. We don't endorse it, but we depict it because maybe it'll make somebody think a little differently about it.
Yeah. And you have both the lead character going through that when she's working at the zine, and a scene in the flashback world with this where, again, that dynamic when somebody realizes you're not arm candy, you're actually the reporter.
Right.
You see the modes change. But you mentioned the interviewing various musicians and artists. Great meet your idol moment. And you can mention terrible ones, not around the sexism side of things, because that's pretty obvious, but, whether good or bad ones otherwise.
Man. I have not had interactions that have been, really unspeakably terrible. I've had a couple of people say kind of insane things to me, but...
but it's rock and roll. So.
But it's rock and roll.
You can talk literary, too, if you want, but...
man, I'm trying to think. Meeting my heroes would have been the really good ones. Gosh, my mind is just going blank. That's so sad. I did get to hang out with all the guys from Suede, which was quite fun. They're lovely. Matt Osmond's become a pal, and he's also a writer, so we go back and forth about writer stuff. And I was of the Britpop band, Suede was always my favorite, so that was a fun hang for sure.
Next book.
This is day 2.
I know, you're just starting the tour, which I should also ask about, but,
this is day 2 of a 34-city book tour that I will finish up in, mid-November. We are talking about the next thing, and I feel like I'm a real headache for marketing people, because I never want to do the same book twice, and that's what everybody wants, is, do more of the thing that's already working. Hot Wax was a hard sell, because a lot of editors were coming back to us with, but can it just be more like Villains? Can it be more like your first book, because that one's doing well now? But I never wanted to be a genre writer. I never thought of myself just kind of writing the same kind of book over and over again. I always wanted to be able to play with a bunch of different genres and kind of take them and make them my own. So I'm still in the early stages of thinking about what the next thing is, but my writing is also always very intertextual. So Villains is very obsessed with Shakespeare. Hot Wax is very obsessed with rock and roll. And the next thing I'm kind of feeling my way into here is maybe thinking about film noir as a jumping off point, because that's one of my comfort things. When I need to get out of the Hot Wax mindset for a minute and go do something else, I watch a lot of old black and white Humphrey Bogart movies. And when I'm on tour and I'm in the car for hours and hours and hours, I can just listen to music for 8 hours uninterrupted and not get bored with it. But sometimes when I just need a change of pace, I listen to a lot of old radio detectives from the 1940s. It's so corny and I love it so much. So I listen to a lot of a Johnny Dollar insurance claims investigator, and it's just a format that you don't hear anymore, which is such a shame. I really love radio drama as a format. Yeah. So I've been thinking about mucking around with something in kind of a film noir sort of space and figuring out what that would look like on paper, because the roman noir is definitely a thing too. But I was mucking around with writing, seeing if I could write something entirely in black and white, just because I was curious what that would feel like. What if you wrote a world that actually had no color? Which has been a fun exercise. So I'm still in the research phase, because I do a lot of research for every book that I work on. But I've got some residencies lined up for the spring where I'm hoping I can actually pull some kind of a manuscript together.
So touring. How do you prepare for a book tour like this?
Oh, man. Well, this is the second time I've done a big, giant book tour like this. We did a big tour for Graveyard Shift last year, and the only reason we're really able to do tours this size, because most publishers are pretty down on touring, and they think events don't pay for themselves, and they don't really want to do it anymore. But I was really insistent about it with Graveyard Shift, and I finally said, I was like, what if I just drove myself? Yeah. What if I drove myself? Could we get to more places? And they said, if you want to do that, we can do that. So it's been complicated. On Saturday, I drove up to Boston to leave my dog with some friends who have kindly agreed to adopt him for the next 2 months while I'm on the road. And then it's planes, trains, automobiles, and I'm in a different city pretty much every day. It's all about making it easier on yourself. And the thing about living touring life is, and I've done this for a while just because I've traveled a lot in the last couple of years. I did live out of my car for something like 18 months while I was working on this book, and I did 7 or 8 cross-country road trips there and back before that. It's your daily life, so you have to treat it like daily life instead of treating it like kind of an anomalous thing when you're traveling 200 days a year. So I don't rely on fast food. I go to the grocery store and travel with a cooler, so I've got healthy stuff with me, and I don't skip the gym. I don't skip my healthy habits. I don't skip telehealth appointments if I can possibly help it. And yeah, it's prep work. It's making sure that everything you can possibly manage before you get on the road is already handled so that you're not dealing with things like getting prescriptions filled while you're in the middle of nowhere, Iowa for 24 hours. Or like what happened last year, I didn't realize my driver's license expired while I was in Europe. And I got home, and at the time I was still a resident of Texas because before that I lived in the UK, and that was the only permanent address that I had. So I flew from Paris to Dallas, and then on the one day that I was supposed to have off on tour, instead of having a day off, I drove 6 hours to Abilene to get a new driver's license so that I could continue driving to California the following day.
I showed up at the FDA with a expired driver's license, because you have to have ID to go into government buildings, and it was post-COVID, and nobody was keeping track of anything. I get there, I took it out of my wallet, realized it was expired. I'm like, I'm just going to go right through and do that. And they took one look at it, like, sorry, dude, you're not going in. We need somebody to go vouch for you and bring you. But yes, there were those moments of, oh, gee, 4 years, and
yeah. So you have to just remove all the friction that you possibly can, because weird stuff is gonna happen. Like you're gonna forget that your driver's license is expired, or you're gonna break a tooth in the middle of your tour and have to kind of cope with that. But the other thing about it really is I would not be able to do this without leaning on a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I'm not married. I don't have kids. I don't have a nuclear family structure at all.
Dog.
Really, I do have a dog.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of really close friends. I'm very lucky in that way. I have found family that's spread out kind of all over the country. So I've got friends who have taken my dog. I've got friends who are, checking on my house for me while I'm away and that kind of thing. So learning to lean on community to make it possible for me to be away from home for so long has been a learning experience, because I do have an independent streak a mile wide, and that's been something I've had to get used to. But sort of in the absence of having a traditional nuclear family structure, I have become very dependent on my friends. And I'm lucky that I have such good ones. And that's the thing that Hot Wax is about, too, is about different ways of building a life and building a community and taking care of each other, even if you don't have that kind of nuclear family unit.
As far as the tour goes, good merch?
Great merch.
What do you got?
Great merch. This is a book about stuff, right? Yeah. It's you can't do a proper rock and roll concert tour without some merch. So we made T-shirts.
I need to get one of these, because I also have to ask whether you named the lead singer Gil after me or not. But I assume, yes, deep down you knew someday I'm going to staff for a podcast some schlep from New Jersey named Gil.
I do, yes. Yeah. I will totally get you a Gil in the Kills t-shirt.
Awesome.
We made speaking of friends, I have an amazing friend who is a graphic designer who did a bunch of swag for Graveyard Shift for me, and I hired her again to make stuff for Hot Wax, and it was so much fun. She's also a musician, so we sat down and I showed her all the playlists, and she said, okay, what kind of a band is it? Like, what kind of a vibe? What kind of a... And I got to design, the album art and all that sort of stuff in my head, but I have no talent as a visual artist, so I got to give that to Hannah and let her bring it to life. So we've got stickers for both of the bands in the book. We've got buttons. We've got Matchbox cars. I bought 15 pounds of candy for this tour that I'm taking with me. Everyone is getting lollipops, and I'm having little races to see who can open them the fastest, because Chupa Chups are actually really hard to get unwrapped, which I learned the hard way when I was trying to eat them in the car.
Oops.
But yeah, this is the thing, is I really wanted this book tour to feel like a concert tour as much as possible. Yeah. I really wanted it to be fun for people. I want to make book tours a thing again. So yeah, it's been a blast making stuff for this book, making posters, making t-shirts for everybody on the team. I have a couple of vintage Polaroid cameras that I'm taking with me and making a little scrapbook of all the events that I do. So yeah, I think that analog media is something that we're going to hold on to increasingly tightly in the coming years, as the subscription model means that we don't own anything and data centers are slurping up lakes every 5 minutes. Like,
that's those zines I gave you don't exist. I mean, I made them digitally so that I could print, but there is no, just send me a PDF. The whole thing was make a physical thing. You know?
And that is something that I love so much about record culture. Like, when I started collecting records in a real serious way, part of what kept me in it was the people. The people who are obsessed with this stuff are so interesting. Like, you can talk to somebody who's got 600 copies of the same record and tell you why they're all different and like why he has that
I
many.
have more live Joe Jackson music than Joe Jackson does. I'm pretty sure. I keep going. I look through my iTunes or whatever we call the library now. I'm like, how did I end up with that much live whatever. I've got all the Joe Jackson records that have ever existed, and you know.
And it's so funny.
Somehow.
Like, every record collector you talk to has a thing like that. Like, what's your thing about your collection that you have, like,
the thing that nobody else is ever going to be able to say.
The thing that nobody else has.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
If people ask me that, I'm like, yeah, I have one of the deepest Led Zeppelin bootleg collections probably on the planet. And that was a big part of research, was listening to bootlegs, because you can hear the audience, how they're reacting to everything in real time, what the repartee with the performer is like. But the actual physical object of a record was maybe kind of the point zero for this novel. Because analog is just different. Like, the music sounds better, first of all, because it's not compressed to death. You get a sound stage. You close your eyes and you can see where the instruments are in the space. You get that depth and warmth and those rounded tones that just get completely flattened with digital music. But it's music for music lovers, because you get album art that's not the size of a postage stamp. You get a gatefold. You get liner notes. My God, I miss liner notes. You get all the weird etchings and the runouts. And I really love stuff. I love the history of pop culture. I love the history of stuff. I really love vintage clothes, which is another thing that comes up in the book, is like, what's the history of all this? And especially in the age of, AI stealing everything under the sun and everything going kind of the way of the digital, I'm just getting more back into the analog. I feel like that's where our heart and souls really are, in those like hard artifacts of a human being made this with their hands.
I'll give you a Polaroid after this, or an Instax. I'll print one out for you before we split.
And maybe that's partly why I got so fixated on hands in this book, is the idea of everything tactile, things that you can actually touch in a world where everything has become ether.
Yeah. When I recorded with Wayne White, the artist he lives in LA a million years ago now, 10 years, I guess, he referred to the stink. The stink is the thing, and that's that human aspect to it all. And he was making art that was funny and had, at the time he was doing these. I don't know if you've ever seen a documentary about him. Beauty is Embarrassing. Watch this while you're on.
I love that title.
85 minutes. Oh, it's wonderful. The thing that made him famous-ish was taking existing paintings of landscapes and such and painting words into them, but not like that LA painter, I'm blanking on his name now. But anyway, he would paint these words in three-dimensionally with the same light that's in the original painting itself. And they would be these very funny things that were showing up in what he was writing, or the words he was putting in. But we talked about that sense of, the human touch, and not doing these things on computer, not having assistants doing X, Y, and Z. And it was, the stink was his term for it. So.
I might call it like the sweat.
Yeah, I know. But he was coming from Tennessee and just had the stink. That was his.
I love that. Yeah, like that was one thing that was really fun about this book. Like, the number of reviewers who have described it as sweaty. I'm like, yeah, you get it.
Yeah, the characters don't get to bathe.
Nope.
and you highlight that, because it's one thing when, they were on the road for X number of days and we just sort of allied over what the hygiene of that means.
Yep.
You lean in.
I lean in, because that's part of the world. That's like what it's really like, is it's, there is some glamour to it, but this is also not a book about a band that is at the level of playing arenas. They're not, they don't have a rider with bottles of champagne on it. Like, they're fighting for their lives out there. They're all staying in the same crappy van, and they're sleeping like 4 to a motel room. And, I've done a lot of that. There are connotations of that. The physical aspects of that mean a lot. Yeah, it's like, in some ways it's kind of a gross book. Like, it's sweaty, it's bloody, there's spit all over the place. Like, but I didn't want to dress it up and make it neat and make it cute, because rock and roll is not, that's not what it's about. Yeah. And I thought that was great fun. So
it was.
Yeah, I'm here for the stink, here for the sweat.
Yeah, it was not a book it wasn't aspects of it that I was expecting, and I thought they just made the world so much more complete. So the big last question I always ask, besides naming a character after me, what have you been reading?
What have I been reading? Well, I just reread John Ray's book, Gone to the Wolves, because we did an event together last night at the Strand, and it's just marvelous.
Did you think he was going to quiz you? Was that the? I'm
no,
just kidding.
I realize that not everyone does this, but I do like to read all of my conversation partners' books if I can, just because I think a conversation is more interesting if I'm not the only person talking.
I do 50 of these a year, so I wasn't able to go back and do villains. But after this,
okay. Yeah, and I also just so much of what I read now is dictated by what I need to read for work, whether I'm blurbing something or it's research that I'm doing, that actually just having a reading list of novels that are essentially recommended to me by conversation partners of people I'm going to talk to. That's fun. I love that. So I've been reading John Ray's book. I'm also, because I'm always doing research with one hand, I'm reading a book about gunpowder.
Yeah.
Just a nonfiction book about the history of gunpowder, which might come up in a future project, maybe. I don't know, depending what I find out. And I have been revisiting a lot of hard-boiled fiction as I think about maybe moving into some noir. I've been rereading some Chandler, but Hammett is really my favorite. So I picked up a really nice early edition of the Continental Ops stories. Red Harvest is one of my favorite novels.
I was just going to say Red Harvest. I'm a big Miller's Crossing mark as Coen brothers go. So yeah, Red Harvest and The Glass Key were the
I reread Red Harvest recently for a class I was teaching because Hammett is a master of that kind of physical writing. And there's a particular chapter in that book, it's chapter 25, it's called Whiskey Town. And it is one of my favorite pieces of prose because it is an absolutely marvelous piece of action writing, which is really hard to do. Yeah. The way that character's brain computes the world around him as he's moving through it in this absolutely chaotic shootout scene is a masterclass in how to write action in fiction, which I was doing a lot of in Hot Wax. But I reread that for a writing workshop I was teaching, and it really just kind of sent me back down this noir kind of rabbit hole. So I've been reading a lot of Dashiell Hammett. I just recently read Kenneth Fearing's book, The Big Clock, which is a kind of hard-boiled sort of novel that is all about the publishing industry, but it's also kind of absurdist at the same time. I thought it was delightful.
Yeah.
I thought it was delightful. It's a little surreal, but it was a real fun read, and it's short. So I'm really bad at reading front list.
It's just whatever. Again, I'm spending my time with the Magic Mountain right now. So, a few months ago it was Musil and The Man Without Qualities, and I figured this would be a nice bridge to stay in that pre-war Germany, Austria type thing. So extracurricular reading is good. It doesn't have to be whatever's new. It can be, the things that are new to us. Yeah. So anyway, you've got 33 more cities to go hit, and I don't want to keep you from Brooklyn this evening. But ML, thanks so much for A, coming on the show, B, for making the gift of this book, because this was fantastic and kind of brought me into my area of rock and roll and this area of rock and roll and how they overlap, and this was a lot of fun. So
thank you so much. I really wanted it to be a book that was fun. I think we have undervalued fun in culture for a long time.
The adjective I use is propulsive. As far as reading go, Matt Ruff is the king of this stuff. He did the book Lovecraft Country.
Oh, yes, okay.
Yeah, and pretty much all of his books, you'll start and then discover, wow, 75 pages. Okay, I just blew through that, and same thing. You kept me engaged and going, and not in one of those, I wonder what happens next, but just the whole world they're in just kind of took me along. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun.
And that was ML Rio. Go get Hot Wax, out now from Simon & Schuster. It's fantastic. I hope I really got across how much I adored this book, how much fun it is, how thoughtful it is, and how character comes out without the need for characters to explain everything about themselves. It was just a joy to read. Now, you should hit up her site, which is mlrio.com, for more about her writing, interviews, news, and especially her tour dates. Like I said, it sounds like the tour is going to be a lot of fun. And that's mlrio.com. She's also on Blue Sky as ML Rio. Just search for that. On Facebook as author ML Rio, and Instagram as Sure as Mel. That's SUREASMEL. I'll have links to all this in the show and episode notes for this one. Thanks for listening to the Virtual Memories Show. You can support this podcast by telling other people about it. There's no better way to build an audience than through word of mouth. Also, visit Apple's podcast page for us and leave a rating and review. Every little bit helps, you know? You can also support the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it, and who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or comic or theater or art exhibition or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by sending me a postcard, letter, email, DM if we're connected on Instagram or Blue Sky, or by leaving a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. Messages can be up to 3 minutes long. It'll cut you off after that, so call back and leave another message if you do. And let me know if it'd be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with our listeners, but I'd never run someone's message without their permission, so let me know. Now, if you've got money to spare, I appreciate it, but don't give it to me. I've got a day job that pays the bills. You should give to individuals and institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Crowdfunder, Indiegogo, all those crowdfunding platforms, where you'll find people who really need help just trying to make ends meet or get an artistic project going, covering medical bills or car payments or veterinary bills, and just a few dollars from you might make a real difference in their lives. Now, when it comes to institutions, I give to my local food bank and World Central Kitchen every month, but there are a lot of other things you can give to the Poor People's Campaign, Freedom Funds, Election Funds, Planned Parenthood, and Women's Choice. There's a lot of things you can do with your money to try to help build a better world, so I hope you'll give. Now, our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You can visit my archives at vmspod.com to check out my 2018 conversation with Hal, where you can learn more about his art, his music, and more. And you can follow Hal on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. That's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download all our past episodes at Apple Podcasts and other podcast sources. And you can find all my episodes and sign up for the Virtual Memories Show newsletter at vmspod.com. And I'm also on Blue Sky and Instagram and YouTube as vmspod. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.